Hi everyone, Jakub here. I've been a part of and worked with communities that are just lovely. Power Rangers Battle for the Great U and Green Hell VR are among the best there are, despite being so vastly different. One was created by the players, the other by the studio responsible for developing the game. One is tiny, the other one is constantly growing. One is for a multiplayer title, the other one is for a VR one, and so on. However, they do have some things in common. Responsive and fair administration, decent titles behind them, devs that actively want to improve their titles, and dedicated players. However, while these are great examples of gaming communities, most of the communities out there are less than great. While a lot of them are poorly maintained, overlooked, or not even acknowledged by the devs, shout out to most Western JRPG communities, there are a few things that I believe will impair any community and will make it toxic. In this video, I'll talk about 3 main reasons why the players you manage may turn sour and toxic. One of them will depend mostly on the person who deals with the community, one is an entire studio's affair, and one is tied to your game's monetization practices, so it won't be changed unless you were to revamp the whole title. I've also realized, having written most of the article, that this is actually a guide on how to do these 3 things well, and instructions on how to achieve this state in which people turn against you become a very small part of the whole thing. Let's talk about them, shall we? The first one is pretty simple: not nurturing the community. This one may have many different phases and may look drastically different on a case-to-case basis, but it boils down to one thing. Games are a form of entertainment, and people are getting more used to getting as much out of the entertainment as it gets. This is why so many games have events, regular sales, community Discord servers and whatnot. If your title has even a semblance of depth and competitive play, people will most likely start flocking around your game, talking about the most effective ways to play, interesting lore bits and such. You can partly fulfill these needs by moderating and engaging with your players within spaces created for this purpose. Some live ops specialists would also be a great addition to your team if you'd like to host events and provide new content to your game in an effective manner. Imagine now that you don't do any of these things and your game isn't huge, good or varied enough to provide fuel for talks about the lore or speedrunning strats for the upcoming 20 years or so. Without efforts to have your community nurtured, it will become disinterested and will most likely wane away into obscurity over time. While this is the most possible outcome and, objectively speaking, the future that awaits most games and their communities, it can get way more negative under some circumstances though. If you have a title, a franchise, or an IP that shows potential, treat your game as a one-and-done endeavor, not providing new content and bug fixes, and if explicitly you state some stuff regarding the content of the game, especially pertaining to the new content, and won't follow through with your declarations, this one will surely get you some hate. The last of the 3 points mentioned is quite complicated and forces you to be as cautious in your communications as possible. By not following through, I mean not keeping up with publicly communicated deadlines, promising stuff that you won't do. It can be, for example, new content, a sequel or bug fixes, or lying or not being direct about things regarding your game. People are more likely to take a "no, I won't tell you about the exact workings of these mechanics because this and that" quite decently, instead of meddling or such. The second thing that will make the community bitter is ignoring their voices. I listed it as an entire studio's affair, as the approach of the community's feedback and opinions can affect the workflow of the entire studio. Let's talk about what user feedback actually is in this case. It boils down to reports of negative stuff like bugs, bots, exploits and glitches, opinions regarding the quality, fun and balance of the game itself, including the monetary balance of the game, for example, if your in-app purchase options are sensibly priced or not, and if they provide good value for the money, and ideas for new content. Before you start seeking and pushing all these into the game, we need to remember a couple of things. You own your game, and you are responsible for what it ultimately is. Other people may have ideas but won't even be able to provide reasoning behind them. You are in a position where you need to secure your profits, and some decision choices, while not popular among the community, will ultimately be beneficial for your studio. These people, while dedicated enough to engage with the product on such a high level, will not be endlessly loyal to you and your brand, and if there is a similar but better experience, they will hop right on it. Keeping these things in mind, the most sensible thing to do with what the community says would be as follows. Fix the most crucial bugs and errors as soon as possible, especially if they impair the gameplay itself, the gameplay loop, or the payment systems, if applicable in this case. Smaller bugs can be dealt with over time, and the fixes can be introduced in your regular updates. New content and balance changes are often introduced in equal intervals, so gather feedback regarding it more actively after they are introduced in order to gather more info about that, and it will help you with tweaking the game and making further decisions for the production team. While you as a studio will ultimately be responsible for the direction your title takes, gauging the community's sentiment, collecting their opinions, and using them to understand how some of your design choices are perceived by your customers may provide an interesting and extremely valuable insight for the devs. To turn your community toxic and aggressive towards you, simply ignore their opinions. Even stronger would be if you said that you are aware of their feedback and then simply your company ignored it. Or if you said that you will take action and then wouldn't. One of the harshest ways of riling up the community behind your game against you is to have a long-running problem, say bots, acknowledging it and doing nothing about it. The third thing is a specific occurrence that may appear almost exclusively in games based around some sort of a competitive aspect of the gameplay, for example a player versus player card game like Hearthstone, with in-app purchases. A fun fact, they are not called microtransactions anymore because some of them are far from micro, and it is using extremely harsh monetization practices, while stuff like cosmetic items, meaningful DLCs and DLCs that will speed up the gameplay loop are more or less accepted to be paid for, at least in cases of optional content. There is stuff that won't make your players happy, namely things that will help hugely during the PvP part of the game. Buffs, overpowered weapons and characters, special power-ups. This is all bad for the community if buying these things is the only option to get them. However, when you combine these things with the eradication of a skill-based approach, making your game dependent on a single click of a button, people will become extremely toxic both towards you and towards other players. How to avoid it? Be sensible when optimizing your monetization, while making sure that you have enough money to keep your studio thriving. Maybe try new monetization methods or conduct A/B tests. There's a lot of stuff to be done here. On the other hand, there is also the entire part of making the game more engaging and more skill-based. Yeah, so that's about it. I hope that you enjoyed this video and learned something from it. Of course, many other things may cause the community of your game to turn against you and each other, but I believe that aside from talking about these three cases, I was able to show something important. It is often the product that dictates how people will behave. Not everything is on a community manager's shoulders, and to translate a Polish saying, you won't make a whip out of shit. This is a new article, or shall I rather say in this particular case a script that I wrote, and I expect to still cover some things from a backlog. So if you enjoyed it and want to learn more about marketing in the gaming industry, subscribe to my channel and give this clip a thumbs up. Thank you for watching. Cheers.